Our next speaker is Kobus Ehlers. Kobus is the co-founder and former CEO of a very well-known company, SnapScan. After he exited the company, he founded Radar in 2018, which is a tool that assists teams to have those one-on-one conversations that really matter and ensures that what is important doesn't get lost in what is urgent. Sharing tonight on Scale Up Lessons, please welcome Kobus.
Thank you very much. So, as you've heard, there's a bit of a journey, and I've been asked specifically to tell you about the sort of scale up lessons, but to understand that, I think I need to give you the whole story. I need to start at the beginning. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of how we got to build SnapScan, what our experiences there were, and some of the lessons, and then I'll end off by telling you a little bit about what we're up to at the moment. So SnapScan, at least at the end of last year, was the biggest mobile payments product in South Africa. It's still the biggest. I'm just no longer involved, so that's as far as my knowledge goes, and I can tell you that sort of historical part of the story. But what you may have experienced today is quite different from where we started out. Okay, so we started off in 2012. The real backstory is I was lecturing at Stellenbosch University, and we discovered there was this interesting new trend happening where people were looking at big data. And after sort of lots of backstory, I got convinced to quit my lecturing job and start this wonderful and exciting new startup doing big data. But if you work for a university, you may or may not know, you need to give 3 months leave before you can go, because you have to wait until the end of the academic term. And when I arrived at this new startup that I was about to embark on day one we discovered, well, actually it's 3 months later and big data is no longer such an interesting topic. So I quit my job and I don't really have a new one. So it wasn't wonderful. And we had to figure out where to go from there. But what was interesting at that point, in Stellenbosch at least, is a lot of people, specifically one company, Mixit, which some of you may or may not remember, was starting to dabble in payments. And it was quite a fascinating topic at that point. It was sort of right at the start when everybody thought, oh, fintech may be a thing. So we really started at that point and built a bunch of internal tools for them, and then a payment system and lots of things, and decided to go it on our own and build a payment product, which was quite an insane thing to do, and I'm still maintaining it was an insane thing to do. But what we started off with was one idea, and that was that it seems like smartphones are going to be a thing. Which sounds incredibly trite today, but if you think back to 2011, 2012, I was happily using my Nokia 6110 and thinking it was great. But this iPhone thing had something special about it, so we sort of geared the whole company around that. We started off doing essentially online shopping. So we built a tool, this is the first version of SnapScan, that we only launched in the US, and that was supposed to help shopping cart abandonment. We built the entire product in, if I recall correctly, it's in the slides, in 18 days. So we had an idea, we built it, rolled it out, had the first customer in the US in 18 days, which was wonderful and exciting. It just turned out that it was a terrible product and nobody wanted it. And we also had some really good realizations as 20-year-olds going, well, why on earth are we doing this? And that essentially sent us back to the drawing board. So that was the first pivot, where we said, we're a company in South Africa. South Africa has a whole bunch of challenges. We have the technology to do a bunch of things. Can we make it all a little bit less Silicon Valley and a little bit more closer to earning money at some point in our lives? So that's when we started doing, essentially, when we started building SnapScan, we had a whiteboard with all kinds of things that we would never do. Physical payments, real-world merchants, fikaing things, working with a bank. It very, very closely resembles our final strategy at the end that we ended up doing. But we had to go through that journey and realize that you have to sometimes do the hard things. So we thought, well, maybe we can build a tool to allow you to just buy things in the real world using your phone. And that's really where we started. So this is the very first SnapScan merchant. at Route 44 Market in Stellenbosch, and we had an incredibly professionally printed A4 page that was folded in half, and some incredibly illegally used logos of payments associations, which we should never talk about. But there was something magical about 4 guys at that point and some code that could move real money in ways that you really, really shouldn't do. But it was interesting to see that you could apply technology, and in the real world, somebody could buy something that they couldn't before. We learned many, many lessons in this very initial phase of the business. One of them is don't make developers sell products to customers. One of the other ones is really think incredibly carefully before you print a poster that says, no more cash, no problem, which apparently doesn't always make people think of payments. But yeah, it was an interesting journey to sort of get that initial first stage. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm going to focus on the scaling part, but that was the really initial business. Then moved to Stellenbosch, started sort of doing slightly larger merchants, got involved with a whole bunch of banks, Standard Bank predominantly, because at some point we realized we had to get into the formal banking system. And then something very interesting happened, mostly because the team wasn't very motivated to work to our agreed timelines. I entered the App of the Year competition for us as a business. And we got selected by some hook or crook to get on the shortlist. And we said, cool, we'll do this. And the night before I looked at the details and it said the finals are being judged in Constantia, and it was wonderful. I had planned it all out. But I just sort of Googled the address to see what the sort of traffic would be getting there the next day. And it turned out something that I didn't know was that Cape Town has Constantia, but there's also a Constantia in Johannesburg. So I realized that at about 10:30 in the evening, before the final judging the next day. And then I had to phone sort of all the other people in the business going, listen, can I buy a really expensive plane ticket, like 3,000 Rand or something crazy at that point, to go do this. And won App of the Year, got a whole bunch of press out of that, and it turns out to have been quite a good call. Then there's sort of this intermittent period that's all a blur, from fighting with organized crime gangs with credit card fraud through to moving offices 3 times in 6 months because we completely underestimated how fast the business would grow, to this really important part, which is what happens now that you're sort of over that first initial hurdle, but you haven't quite made it yet. You need to scale up. So I learned a bunch of lessons. The first one is that large companies don't exist, not even if they acquire you. Large businesses don't operate in the way that you think if you're a small business. There's no such thing as, so in our case, I mean, we got bought by Standard Bank, but there's no such case as speaking to Standard Bank about something. You will speak to Standard Bank, the person's name may be John, and then you'll speak to Standard Bank and the person's name may be Mary, and the next person's name may be Notukuza, and they all have very, very different formal opinions about what Standard Bank wants. So if you're scaling up as a business and you're working with large organizations, you need to understand that there's no such thing as a single organization. The second thing that you need to understand, and that's sort of what brought me to what we're doing now with Radar, is that people are hard and culture is even harder. When you reach a point when, I think there's a magical point at about 15 people, as soon as you add number 16 or 17 or 18, suddenly all of those things that are just not mission critical suddenly becomes mission critical. Somebody wants to know what the leave policy is, or somebody else wants to know, is it okay if you said unlimited leave, but can I go to Brazil for 4 months? And all of these things that you thought would be fine and they would work themselves out, but you kind of now are playing catch up all the time. So that was a very interesting experiment. It's also incredibly entertaining then working with large organizations. I mean, we're an incredibly regulated space with very large organizations, and you get the Reserve Bank visiting your office and it looks like that, and they get incredibly concerned and start making hushed phone calls in the passages until you can bring them framed certificates, and then it's okay. But it is quite scary making that culture sort of fit together. The other interesting thing is you really should move fast and break things, except please don't break the things when you are bigger. I cannot express how pleasant it is being a small company and being able to go, well, let's deploy some new code, or let's change the way our product works, or this pricing wasn't right, let's change it. Once you're sitting at more than 1 million customers, you can't just change the terms and conditions because you think it's no longer applicable. Things immediately get slightly caught in golden syrup and become very slow, and it's wonderful and it should be celebrated, but it is quite an adjustment to make as you're busy scaling your business. That suddenly you can't just do what you want. You have to act responsibly. Even more so if you're processing billions of rands, then you really can't break things. You should go to jail for a very long time. The other thing that I think you realize is, and there's this incredibly difficult thing that happens when you realize actually you are now part of a company and it's no longer your company, and it's a good thing. And that is, it's incredibly acute if you sell your business. That's also a learning. If you sell your business, you've sold your business. But even before then, you have to realize that this business that you've built, this company, is a thing in and of itself. It has a life. It has motivations. It has people involved in it. It has decisions that are bigger than you. And it's an interesting challenge to sort of transition your team as you grow from it's ours and we take responsibility for it, we built it, to going, yes, we did all of that, but also it's now bigger than us. And then the last one is an interesting side note maybe on how identity matters a lot. Something as simple as figuring out what the branding must be actually has a real impact on how the employees and the customers of the company interact. So was it worth it? It's an interesting question. I ask myself this quite often. But when I can now today do something that we couldn't do 5 years ago, as trivial as paying for something with a phone, whether it's parking or whether it is buying something at a festival, or whether it's allowing people who are not part of the formal economy to actually participate. And when I still used to get statements, when I get a statement and I go, we've processed several billion rand, I go, how on earth are we allowed to do that? And that's an interesting feeling and a really encouraging one. What I'm doing now, and that's also an interesting part of this, is a bunch of us who were on this journey sort of moved on to a new chapter saying we've learned a number of things in this process. We've learned that building businesses are specifically hard. And there are some lessons that we hope we can share. So what we're busy doing at the moment in a brand new company called Radar, we've just started it, is saying how do we help small businesses manage the people side of your business? As you currently use outsource CFO to take care of your finances, maybe we can help you take care of your people, whether that's payroll or whether it is policies or whether it is asking yourself where are your signed employment contracts and have you updated them every time you gave somebody an increase, or what do you do now that you have a CCMA case? There are a bunch of these things that feel like they are an absolute crisis simply because it's almost never a good time to spend some energy or effort on fixing them. And that's really what we're looking at. And hopefully, in a year or two, I can stand here and tell you the story of how we've scaled that second one. So yeah, that's my story.